I call the Honourable Member Julianne Genta.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker.
Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koutou e te whare. Mr. Speaker, I rise tonight to speak specifically first on the Regulatory Reform Repeals Bill. I'd like to begin by echoing the considered and clearly articulated views of my esteemed colleague, Dr. Russell Norman, especially in his first speech on this bill. The Green Party advocates for a sensible, rational, and evidence-based approach to regulation, as opposed to an ideological one. The Green Party is happy to support the non-controversial Regulatory Reform Repeals Bill, as it repeals a number of superseded and outdated pieces of legislation, 31 in fact. But as Dr. Norman noted in his previous speeches, there are both good and bad regulations. We often hear about the detrimental cost of regulation, especially from that side of the House, but we hear very little about the huge cost of neglecting to regulate appropriately. And the cost of neglecting to regulate can be huge. This is evidenced by the leaky homes fiasco, the cost of the Christchurch earthquake, the cost of the Rena disaster. If we move away from a highly charged ideological opposition to regulation and simply look at the evidence, we can see that there are both good and bad regulations. And the test must be, what are the overall impacts on the community of either regulating or failing to regulate? And we can't just look at the impacts on one specific special interest group. So interest groups, and these can be specific business groups, for example, will inevitably argue to reduce regulations and compliance costs because they have a direct financial interest in reducing the costs that they have to pay. But this, in and of itself, does not mean that those regulations or costs are without merit, or that removing the costs will be good overall for the economy and New Zealand as a whole. And in fact, there is a lot of evidence, Mr. Speaker, that regulation is the single biggest driver of innovation. So it is the role of Parliament and this House to adjudicate on behalf of the people and not to cave to specific lobby groups and reduce oversight and short-term costs just so some groups can profit at the expense of all of us. Mr. Speaker, as I said, the Green Party does support the Regulatory Reform Repeals Bill because the legislation that is proposed to be repealed is redundant, and it wasn't really affecting anyone, and it probably wasn't costing anyone much money, which is why it didn't seem like there were very many submissions on it at Select Committee. When it comes to the Regulatory Reform Bill, the Green Party would have liked to have supported this bill. It removes some petty obstacles that small and medium businesses often face, and small and medium businesses are our best opportunity to develop a clean, green economy that works for all New Zealanders. As Dr. Norman said earlier today, it removes an outdated restriction that restricts credit unions and their ability to provide financial services. And the Green Party supports practical lawmaking that will help small business and help us transition to a sustainable economy. And that's why we announced a small business policy last year that would significantly simplify tax compliance. But we can't support the Regulatory Reform Bill at the moment because of Part 4. So I'll just take a moment to mention our concerns about the amendments to the Conservation Act 1987. Because these changes potentially make it easier for destructive commercial activities such as mining and large-scale tourism infrastructure development to occur on public conservation land. And that has potentially quite a large impact on our clean green brand and our tourism sector, which is arguably one of our largest exports. Now, at the moment, if someone wants to operate a commercial activity on Crown-owned conservation land, they need permission in the form of a concession granted by the Minister of Conservation or a DOC official. Public conservation lands are far from being locked up, as some would claim, and they are the basis of our billion-dollar tourism industry and the location for considerable commercial activity. So last year, that is in 2010-11, the Department of Conservation had 4,675 concession activities. The biggest group of concessions, more than 871, were grazing concessions. Access easements, including for mining operations, were the next biggest group, followed by garden concessions and aircraft landing concessions. So these concessions have varying levels of impact on landscapes, on plant, wildlife conservation land, but we're concerned that the purpose of the amendments that are proposed in Part 4 of the bill are simply to make it easier for business without necessarily giving the Department of Conservation the resources and the time to weigh up the evidence about whether it's going to be good or not for New Zealand. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable Marianne Street.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.